Hi, apologies for joining late. I hope everybody is doing well. Before we start, I want to just ask Ronnie, did you want to make any introductory comments? Um,
No, I don't have any introductory comments for today.
okay. So we can start. Apologies, I'm trying to pull up the agenda. Um, Could I ask the DOJ staff to just start us on the first agenda item, please?
Thank you, Co-Chair Kulkarni. The first item on the agenda is welcome and introduction by board co-chairs and introductions to, call to order by both board co-chairs and then introductions of all of the subcommittee members.
Okay, why don't we start with that then? So welcome everyone. Apologies, I think both Ronnie and I are under the weather, and I'm also having some technical issues on my laptop. But wanted to welcome everyone to today's meeting. Thank you for joining. And if we can go around and have folks introduce themselves, and I will start. Manju Kulkarni, Executive Director of API Equity Alliance and co-founder of Stop API Hate, and was nominated by Speaker Rendon. Ronnie, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can jump in. Good morning, everybody. Ronaldo Villeda with Hoops for Justice, and I am AG appointee.
I'll jump in. This is Angela Sierra. Good morning, everybody. I'm an attorney with the California Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Enforcement section, and I'm Attorney General Rob Bonta's designee on the board. Looking forward to today's meeting. I'll turn it over to Captain Green.
Good morning, Darren Green, one of the captains in the California Highway Patrol. My position has been delegated to me by my commissioner, Sean DeRee. And my apologies, I don't know who else to send it to. Oh, Miss Lawanda, may I send it to you, please, ma'am?
Board Member Hawkins, I think you might be muted, or there might be some audio issues. We can hear you. Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, while we're waiting to resolve those, Board Member Kennedy, can you introduce yourself?
I'm here. You able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Brian Kennedy, Mount Zion Church of Ontario.
And it looks like Board Member Hawkins may be trying to leave and rejoin. So, Co-Chair Kulkarni, as we
Yes.
proceed through the agenda, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the August 19th, 2024 minutes.
Yes. So, before we take a vote, did folks have any comments regarding the minutes? Otherwise we will, I will accept a motion to approve the minutes as they've been written. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to accept the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Ronnie. Do we have a second?
I will second that. This is Angela.
Great. Thank you, Angela. So we will take a vote. And then may I ask DOJ staff to do the roll call?
Thank you. Motion on the table to approve the August 19, 2024 minutes of the Post Subcommittee. Board Member Green.
Aye.
Green, aye. Board Member Hawkins. Board Member Hawkins. May still be having technical problems. Board Member Kennedy.
Aye.
Kennedy, aye. Board Member
Yes.
Kulkarni.
Board Member Kulkarni, aye.
Kulkarni, aye. Board Member Sierra.
Aye.
Sierra, aye. Board Member Vieda.
Aye.
Vieda, aye. The motion passes with 5 board members voting aye.
Great. Can we move
next-
now to, oh, sorry, Ronnie, did you have something to say?
No, just I think next we have DOJ updates.
Yes.
Thank you, co-chairs. And welcome once again. My name is Alex Simpson. I am part of the leadership team for this year's 2026 report, along with my co-lead Yasmin Manners and our supervising deputy attorneys general, Joelle Marrero and Christine Schwang. Very happy to report for those folks that haven't heard this already from other subcommittees, but I wanted to report to this subcommittee also that we published the 2025 report, published on January 1, 2025. Very happy to have worked with the board and with the team to publish that very important report. One other item that is on my agenda before I turn it over to my colleague Danielle Elliott for the full report out for the Post Subcommittee meeting is to remind everybody and welcome everybody to view the CARE community briefing on the 2025 report. Our office's Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement had a meeting on January 21, 2025 to talk about the report, the conclusions of the report, the recommendations in the report, and a couple of board members also participated in that briefing. So I'm going to post the link to the briefing in the chat. Welcome everybody to watch that briefing, and thank you so much. Now I'm going to turn this report out over to my colleague Danielle Elliott. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Give me just 1 second to share my screen and make sure we are all good to go. Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up? Great. Okay. So my name is Danielle Elliott, and I am a Deputy Attorney General with the Civil Rights Enforcement section of the DOJ, and I'm based in Sacramento. Welcome to the first Post Subcommittee meeting of the year. Today, we have 2 additional DOJ staff members who will present with me today. There's a retired annuitant, Aisha Martin-Walton, and Deputy Attorney General Marissa Leon, who is new to working on this section of the report. So as it is the first meeting of the year, today we will review the statutory responsibilities of the subcommittee and a summary of the subcommittee's prior work and the 2025 report section on post-training and recruitment. And then we will discuss ideas for the 2026 report and the goals for this year. Now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Aisha.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And I know this is late, but Happy New Year. It's good to see everyone as we kick off the new year of work for the Post Subcommittee. The Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015, as it relates to this subcommittee, does 3 primary things. One, it's a call to prohibit racial and identity profiling by law enforcement in California. 2, it requires the Post Commission to consult with the board in developing racial and identity profiling training. And 3, it requires the RIPA board to analyze Post Commission profiling training courses and include its finding in the annual report. The Post Commission, which stands for the Commission on the Peace Officer Standards and Training, and the board are 2 state-level entities created by the legislature, and as a result, work together in partnership on these issues. Next slide, please. So the Penal Code was amended 13519.4 via the Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015 to include curriculum requirements so that the Post Commission could update or develop courses, existing courses or new courses, to include sections on racial and identity profiling for both cadet officers and in-service officers. So what they did was they identified about 6 areas that the courses should focus on to include this information. One is, again, discuss the prohibition of against racial identity profiling, include obligations of the peace officers in 1, preventing, reporting, and responding to discriminatory practices by fellow peace officers. 3, the courses should prescribe evidence-based patterns, practices, and protocols that prevent racial identity profiling. And these are all tools that will help trainers and officers and agencies implement this area of racial and identity profiling in their agencies. Fourthly, provide an overview of the history and the role of the civil rights and human rights movement and struggles and their impact, because this is absolutely important for the 90,000 plus officers to know as they have such important work in the field and interacting with communities throughout California. And then the last 3 deal with the legislature wanted to make sure that these courses also elevate and focus and educate officers on recognizing racial identity and cultural differences among residents, because California is a huge state and there are no 2 communities that are alike. Additionally, review the perspectives of diverse constituency groups. In other words, include community in the development and update of these courses. And then lastly, discuss the negative impact of both intentional and implicit biases, prejudices, and stereotyping. So that is the roadmap that the legislature has laid out that these updates in this particular important area should include. Next slide, please. Okay, post subcommittee role. Many of you have been working on these issues for several years, so you probably already know that in general, there are 3 subcommittee meetings as you do your work in reviewing the trainings and providing consultant advice to Post on the courses that the officers take. There are generally 4 full RIPA board meetings, and this is where you will take your work and present it. Your co-chairs will present it to the full board members, your colleagues, and as a larger group, you will review. This is where questions can be asked, but this is where the topics that you've been working on will be voted on as a full board. Also, let's see, you will review the courses. I had said that earlier, and the most important aspect is also the section of your report will include the latest research. So whatever topics you pick, you generally want to, in addition to reviewing the courses, take a long view and examine what is the current research that's going on. For example, in the 2025 report, you looked at the trends in research as it relates to implicit and biased training. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a summary of the courses and all of the hard work that this subcommittee should be proud of that you have done over the years since the existence and the enactment of the Racial and Identity Profiling Act. You've reviewed 2 basic academy courses. One is LD3, it's called Principal Policing in the Community, and LD42, Cultural Diversity and Discrimination. These are both at the academy level. And we have a list of the report. So if any of you would like to go back and refresh your memories, or the public would like to see what the board has said about their recommendations as it relates to these courses, you can find them in the listed report. For the in-service officers, there are 4 courses that the subcommittee reviewed. principled policing, implicit bias, and procedural justice. There was a bias and racial profiling video, an online course called Beyond Bias and Racial Identity Profiling. There was a segment of strategic communication courses that POST rolled out that the board reviewed. And then lastly, the Museum of Tolerance, Racial and Identity Profiling Train the Trainer program. And this is a huge, all of the courses are extremely important. And the MOT course is in particular important because it's the course where facilitators who are going to teach the courses in the academies must go through this training before they are allowed to do so. So that is just a thumbnail sketch of the courses and the work that you have done so proudly. All right, I think that concludes my section, Danielle. We can, maybe you can present the next slide.
Yes, and I just have one or two more comments on this really quickly. So these were all courses that POST identified as meeting the requirements of AB 953. And there was one final course, which is what we're going to focus on in our 2026 discussion today. And that final course is the field training program. And so the goal in line with the subcommittee is to finish all of its reviews of these POST courses, and that's the trajectory moving forward. And so before we get to that topic, though, we'll review the 2025 report just to get on the same page. And the 2025 report I'll discuss in three parts: guidelines, research, and then the recommendations. So last year, the POST subcommittee of the RIPA board participated in the development of POST guidelines for racial and identity profiling training courses. To meet the Penal Code's mandate for training guidelines, the guidelines should apply to all of the racial and identity profiling courses, and it should help law enforcement agencies with the development of their mandatory policies to inform law enforcement professionals about the relevant legal standards, including RIPA's prohibition against racial and identity profiling. And this slide here goes through a timeline of the guideline development to the present. So back in August of 2023, POST agreed to the board's recommendation to develop racial and identity profiling guidelines as a standalone document and included board members in their development. And board members participated in 2 workshops in May and October of 2024. And at the workshops, POST presented the draft guidelines as having 2 parts. The first part was instructor guidelines, and the second part was an optional course curriculum. And the instructor guidelines provided recommendations for instructor preparation for the course, including setting the tone, time management, instructor challenges, etc. And then for the optional course curriculum, POST used the POST-certified Museum of Tolerance training course on racial and identity profiling, which is called the Racial Profiling Issues and Impact course. And that was the foundational curriculum for this optional training. And at the second workshop in October, POST informed the subject matter experts and the DOJ for the first time the guidelines would only serve as a template 5-hour optional course for advanced officer training. Prior to that workshop, the board had understood that the guidelines would apply to all POST-certified racial and identity profiling courses, including the mandatory basic training and the refresher courses, and including those courses that we reviewed previously on all the past work that this subcommittee has done. And so while the board agrees that it is imperative that the guidelines aid law enforcement training, the board believes that the guidelines should serve as more than just an optional training tool. And anything short of a tool that aids law enforcement agencies with the development of these mandatory policies and trainings regarding a police officer's duty to abstain from racial and identity profiling falls short of the Penal Code mandate. And the board will continue to work with POST to address these concerns on the guidelines. And we'll go back into this again during the 2026 topic discussion. So the board has provided POST with the feedback and shared the 2025 report with them. And we're waiting to hear back from POST on our feedback with respect to the guidelines. Next, in the 2025 report, and we'll go through this quickly now, we looked into emerging research in the field of law enforcement training to eliminate racial and identity profiling and bias. And Aisha mentioned this, we looked deep into the role of implicit bias and the persistence of these disparities that we see in the RIPA data, which raises serious questions about whether training and awareness alone are enough to eliminate bias. So in the studies that we reviewed and included in the 2025 report, we found that the studies indicated that while focused short-term training does reduce implicit bias, and there's some immediate reductions, trainees tend to return to their baseline levels of implicit bias just after a few months. So therefore, to create a lasting reduction in stop data disparities, research recommend weaving this anti-bias intervention into the entire culture of the police departments to shift the department culture towards fair and impartial policing. And there are specific recommendations on the slide from researchers that will help implement that cultural shift. And this includes repeated training sessions, integrating implicit bias throughout the organizational initiatives, etc. And next, we have the report recommendations. So informed by this research, the subcommittee advanced and the full board approved the following recommendations to the legislature regarding law enforcement training and post. So this slide includes just some of the recommendations in the 2025 report, and these ones included focus on measuring and improving course outcomes. So these were made to the legislature, and we recommended, or the post subcommittee recommended, requiring more frequent evaluated and evidence-based training, requiring law enforcement supervisors and field training officers to receive specialized training, including training that includes ways to prevent behavior that could lead to officer decertification, allowing for additional stakeholders beyond the Museum of Tolerance to present additional options for the racial and identity profiling training, funding an independent study under the guidance of the RIPA board and conducted by academic researchers that assesses the efficacy of post training, and providing funding and requiring post to report annually on specific training outcomes and performance measures. And I'll pass it off to my colleague Marisol to go over the recommendations to post from the report.
Good morning, everyone. And in addition to the recommendations to the legislature, the 2025 report also included several recommendations directly to post to evaluate and improve its course outcomes. And these included evaluating the academic research underpinning trainings during its course certification process, revising the process for evaluating law enforcement training and course certification and its quality assessment plans to include additional course criteria that incorporate training outcomes based on officer actions and behavior in the field, and formally evaluating Learning Domain 3 and Learning Domain 42 in the regular basic course comprehensive module tests, which Aisha mentioned earlier. And last week, Post issued a written response to our recommendations, and we will review those written responses and report back at a future meeting. I'll turn it over to Danielle.
Great. So before we jump into the 2026 report ideas, I wanted to make sure we pause and have opportunity for questions from you all on any of the past work of this subcommittee, including the 2025 report or earlier. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to say now? Yes, go ahead, Angela.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Thank you, all of you. This is, to me, very helpful, these slides, to just get us, get me focused in really pulling out the high-level points from our report. And I have a question. Are these slides available to us to print or keep? Is there a link to them, or do we already have those? Because I think they'd be useful for us to have for the future as well.
Yes, I believe subcommittee presentation materials are provided after the meeting, but we'll make sure that board members have this to use.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
I was going to make the same comment and have the same question about the slides. This is super duper helpful. Really appreciate you all sort of sharing sort of where we've come from and then now as we think about where we need to go in this upcoming year, and the DOJ team support has been really invaluable.
Thank you. And I think it helps that we have team members who have been on this committee, or excuse me, working on this project for many years, including Aisha, who can give us a long-term view and really harken back to the reasons that RIPA was enacted and a lot of the goals of the legislature and the goals that you all serve as board members and appointees of those legislators in acting out these statutes goals. So I think with that, we'll move on to the discussion for the 2026 report. which I will just give a brief overview of the 4 topics on this slide, which will kind of be the main framework for the 2026 report. And then we'll pause after each one to kind of go over any questions that you might have. So first, this 2026 report will include a review of the published POST guidelines. So as we discussed, POST has not yet published those final guidelines, and the RIPA board provided their feedback on legal standards edits to both the Museum of Tolerance and to POST, and we're waiting to hear back about those edits. And we expect to continue to work with POST on this and POST to continue working with us on it. And now I'm going to pass it to co-chair member Sierra to provide a brief overview of the POST subcommittee, just an update on the RIPA's co-chair's ongoing efforts with POST to improve communication and effectiveness of the board's relationship to POST.
Great, thank you, Danielle. So I'm going to give a overview and a recap of several meetings that the co-chair, RIPA board co-chair Andrea Guerrero and I have had in the last several months with POST, so that everybody in the subcommittee and then our board, can benefit from the information that we are learning and kind of the relationships that we are continuing to forge with POST. Because as indicated in the beginning of this meeting, under our RIPA legislation, we are and POST are required to work together. There's a lot of important work that we have done and that we are going to need to continue to do. So whatever we can do to strengthen our relationship with POST and make it as our working relationship as effective as possible is in both our agencies' best interest, as well as the interest of all Californians that we are seeking to help with our work. And so, from our meetings with POST, it's very clear that they also very much want to do whatever we can and enhance our communications and our working relationship. So back in November, I'll just briefly go over this meeting. POST invited co-chair Andrea Guerrero and I, as well as some members of our DOJ staff, to meet with them at their headquarters. And so we went there on November 12th of 2024, and we had a full day meeting at their headquarters. And it was really a really great opportunity to learn more about POST, as well as for POST to hear from us about ways and ideas that we have that we can enhance our working relationship. The meeting was very informative. It was very productive, and we really appreciated that opportunity. I'll give you an overview of what was discussed. Again, it was an all-day meeting, so I'm just going to summarize this because I think having this context, I know for us as co-chairs, and I think for all of you, understanding the many types of work that POST is involved in addition to the work that we explicitly work with them on, gives us some really greater context to kind of understand the big picture and can help us more effectively work together. So at this meeting, in attendance was POST Executive Director Manny Alvarez, as well as POST Legislative Liaison Megan Polis. They also had a significant number of their managers at these meetings. And those managers, they provided presentations on the major components of POST, and that included a presentation from their management on their basic training unit. That's essentially the training for the academy for the new recruits, which includes that learning domain 43 and 42, which is the cultural diversity and discrimination domain. Their unit is also responsible for the development and maintenance of a variety of their basic training programs, which looks like that we are going to be involved in reviewing this year. They talked about how there are approximately 41 presenters for this basic training throughout the states. They talked throughout California, and they talked about the testing that those presenters must go through to be able to be certified as a presenter. And this is the unit that also updates their workbooks. and the unit that also audits at least one of those 41 or 42 academies a month. We also received an overview and presentation regarding the Strategic Communications and Research Unit, which is the unit that develops, validates, and manages their personnel selection test for law enforcement agencies. So much of that work of that agency or that unit is related to the background investigations conducted by the hiring law enforcement agencies. And Post does have a role after a law enforcement agency does a background investigation. Post does have a role of looking at what those background investigations look like, kind of, after the fact, after the law enforcement agency has concluded that. We had a presentation from their Training and Delivery Compliance Unit. That is the section of Post that certifies all of the post-certified in-field training courses that a law enforcement agency may be conducting. And they have certified about 900 presenters statewide for those in-field training courses. And this unit reviews course outlines on a 2-year basis. And these are a wide range of topics that these field training courses could cover. For example, it could be a course that is required to promote to management, for example. So again, a very wide range of courses that unit is involved in. There was a presentation from the Training Program Services, and that is the unit that is responsible for developing law enforcement curricula for all California police officers. And that would meet the curricula that would meet the California legislative mandates or other critical law enforcement training needs. We received a presentation on Post Learning Technology and their resources unit. And that is a unit that oversees Post. They have a learning portal on their website for peace officers in California. They present training videos on that portal, and there are approximately about 102 active training courses on the portal. And their stats that they discussed with us is so far there have been about 120,000 peace officers in California that have accessed those training courses. That is a unit that also has developed the mandatory bias and racial profiling refresher courses that must be taken every 5 years. It has to be led by a certified trainer. We also received a presentation from their management counseling and projects unit. And that is the unit that provides various management related services to law enforcement agencies. That would include, management studies, peace officer feasibility studies, team building workshops, and field management training. And then lastly, we received a presentation from their Peace Officer Standards and Accountability Unit, which was the unit that was created by the passage of Senate Bill SB2, which we have done a lot of work on as well in our last report. Again, that is the recent law that establishes a certification requirement for peace officers in California, beginning in January of 2023, and the ability to revoke or suspend a peace officer certification if an act of serious misconduct is found to occur by a peace officer. So again, the presentation in the meeting by these various managers at Post was quite comprehensive. And so it helped, give us a better understanding of the numerous roles and responsibilities that Post must assume. And that gives us, again, a lot of context to work with. And in addition to their presentations, the co-chair Guerrero and we had the opportunity to present about the workings of the board and the post-related issues that we would like to further work with the board on, including the guidelines that we have been talking about in our subcommittee meetings and board meetings, and that we have presented recommendations in our last report, as well as the work that in the recommendations that we have formulated regarding the ways to evaluate effectiveness of post-certified training courses. And again, we also had the opportunity to present on our desire to do what we can to also enhance our communications and working relationships with Post as we move forward. So some of the high-level takeaways from that meeting is, the Post is involved in a very large number of significant projects, and it was eye-opening to see that and to appreciate that, given that they're a relatively small agency. Right now, they have a staff of about 210 full-time employees, or at least as of last November, and that had been a number that had recently grown due to the staffing needs of SB2 and the work that Post is going to be involved in, has been already involved in SB2. They are likely going to see that number grow to about 263 full-time employees, but most of those additional employees will be working on SB2 matters. There was a lot of discussion about the racial and identity profiling guidelines and some of what we have seen and our staff have seen in working at the workshops, and the different information we were seeing about the applicability of the guidelines. And at the time of that November 12th meeting, the idea of whether those guidelines would just be for an optional course or would be mandatory was still under advisement. And as my understanding, as we have continued to speak with Post, that is still the case, that the final decisions as to the scope of those guidelines has not been decided. And then with respect to training effectiveness, the idea of ideas about how post-certified courses could be evaluated for effectiveness. We explored that. We discussed ways in which, to what extent Post has or has not have any type of regulatory oversight over law enforcement agencies, which as to the effectiveness or understanding how once a law enforcement officer goes back to his or her agency, what happens, the next steps. And it appears clear that Post doesn't have a regulatory role with respect to that, but nonetheless, from this meeting and additional meetings we have had with Post, I think they are very open to continuing this discussion about ways in which post-certified trainings can be analyzed for effectiveness, not only in terms of, what are the methods for affecting effectiveness, but from Post perspective, which agency or what entity is really best equipped to be the entity that actually does that evaluation. For example, should that be the actual law enforcement agency? Should that be a third party? And to what extent, if we have recommended that it be Post, what are the actual practical challenges for Post to do that, given their kind of non-regulatory role? But I think that is an issue that we may want to discuss moving forward to further explore, given that in our last report, we do have recommendations about analyzing effectiveness and who should do that, but we do talk about wanting to continue to explore that issue. We have the co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, had a follow-up meeting in end of February with Post. And I think as we are both entities seeing it, it would be very helpful to have these periodic meetings together to explore ways in which that, for example, if we are inviting Post to our meetings, to ensure that we are providing information to Post so that they have a better understanding of which staff to bring or what topics to be covered. We very much have been talking about the ideas that the communication goes both ways. We're making recommendations to Post, and we very much want to hear from them the ideas that they have of areas that they think it would be helpful for us to consider, at least topics for us to consider exploring. So that was our, kind of an overall update of our communications and meetings with Post. They're going to continue. We are feeling really optimistic and really much appreciate that the two entities are going to be continuing to working very closely together. So I think that, one other high level takeaway that I got from the meetings, that to the extent that we are providing comments on individual trainings, post-certified trainings, to the extent that we can, as a subcommittee or as a board, kind of unify our comments as much as possible, or our recommendations, and then present those to Post. That would probably be very helpful in trying to do that in a way where we are not doing sequential comments, but we are packaging them all together. To the extent that we can do that, that might be helpful as well. There was also a lot of discussion, and I think that's going to continue, to the extent that, the timings of our meetings between the RIPA board meetings, our subcommittee meetings, and the post-commission meetings, we are sometimes at different schedules, and sometimes that can pose a challenge for both agencies. So to the extent that we can be kind of thinking about those schedules in advance, and I don't have the answer to that, but I think as we're moving forward, because as we know, if Post is going to be presenting something to the commission, whether they should have our feedback before or after, we will want to continue talking to Post about that. So again, that's kind of just a high level overview of what we learned. And the main takeaway is that we're going to, our goal is to continue working very closely together so that this relationship can be as effective as possible. If there are any comments or questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Co-Chair Sierra, for the work that you and our other co-chair Guerrero did, and this day-long meeting and whatnot. Really appreciate your efforts. I had a couple of questions. First off is, you talked about the scheduling issues and other things, but what would be helpful is, if we could get, regular updates on the RIPA recommendations from Post, to see if they agree, if they disagree, and to see how they are incorporating those recommendations into their trainings. I think that would be especially helpful. And then the other thing is a more specific question. A number of us from this committee or subcommittee attended, one of their subject matter training. Actually, I don't remember the name of it, last October, November. And what was clear in that, this was a 2-day thing in Sacramento, is that there was a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about RIPA, even among the people who do the trainings. So I imagine that if they are confused, then that information then gets out to everyday officers about what RIPA data means, how it's used. I mean, for one thing, they thought all of their identifying information would be included, which we know to be inaccurate, that this is only provided in the aggregate to us. So I think that's a very important, distinction. There are others that they are working under that are problematic. And so I would say that, in a future meeting with them, it would be good to just make sure we get this cleared up, because I think adherence to RIPA partly depends on trust, having an understanding, and nobody is looking for that specific information on officers. Nobody is looking to terminate officers based on this information, that we do it again in the aggregate to understand the impacts of the policies and practices on marginalized communities. So, so that is my both question and comment.
Great, thank you. And yes, and with respect to the updates on the recommendations that the RIPA board has made to post. So as I understand, I think it was from Danielle that we've recently received the post responses to the recommendations, and I believe then maybe and Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that it would be presented at the next subcommittee or board hearing, because I guess the staff just received those responses.
Yes, so last week, the Post Commission had a meeting where they presented their post response to the 2025 report recommendations. And for the past few years, Post has provided a written response and also verbally at a subcommittee meeting. And so we haven't had a chance to thoroughly review those written responses yet, but we will send those out to the subcommittee, and then we will invite Post to join us at a later subcommittee meeting to discuss their responses.
Great, great. And yeah, and one thing I just wanted to add on this topic is that once we see the responses, what I would encourage, based on our meetings with Post and our work on the subcommittee and the board, that I would encourage our subcommittee that to the extent there may be a recommendation that Post does not agree with or explains, the challenges that it has with respect to a recommendation, that shouldn't be the end of the story, that they may be that, yes, our recommendation remains, but in the meantime, there may be some alternatives that we could explore with Post that will achieve the same outcome or a similar outcome, and that it shouldn't be like the end of the work on that topic necessarily, and that there may be some really good opportunities to still do some good work together. For example, as I talked about with respect to the issue about assessing effectiveness of training, once we see this post-written response to that, but to the extent that there are challenges that are presented, that I would encourage us that could be a really fruitful issue to continue to work with Post on, invite them to come talk to us, and there may be some alternative ideas that we can explore at the same time. And then with respect to the issue about the confusion about the RIPA role, I mean, I probably left this out, and I apologize. During the meeting, the larger meeting with Post, we did spend some time, Andrea and I, going over an overview of Post's role, RIPA, the RIPA board's roles, our legislative mandate, and to make sure that we again underscore the legislative reasons and that we are working together, and I think that the experience that has been discussed about with respect to that subject matter training, I think is a good opportunity for us, that to the extent that we are attending any of these meetings with others within Post or other law enforcement agencies, to continue to realize that I think how we communicate our role and what we are doing, and to make sure that we're addressing any miscommunications, that's going to be really important, because it just could be a recurring issue, given that when we're at these workshops, we are working with a large number of other agencies or representatives that may not have been involved in prior meetings with us. So I think that is kind of the challenge that the RIPA board does have. But we did, just so that I want to ensure everybody, we have spent time really outlining our role when we are at these meetings. So thank you.
And I have just
Okay.
one more idea or comment from your question, Manju, about the misunderstanding of the RIPA data and how it's used for individual officers. I think it's important to remember that at that workshop, there was participation by individual officers from different law enforcement agencies throughout the state. So the issue isn't just meeting with the Post Commission and their understanding of RIPA, which they might have. It's just how that information is disseminated down from the top of the department to the line officers. And something that's instrumental in that is field training. And it's how supervisors communicate the RIPA reporting requirements internally, and things like that. And you'll notice in the 2025 report, we did provide recommendations to the legislature about including more specialized training for supervisors in order to get more accurate information related to their line officers so they have a better understanding of why we use this data, how it's used, et cetera. But that is an important consideration and something I think we can include as well in this year's report when we talk about field training, is how is RIPA data discussed in field training, and as a new cadet, what are you taught about it? Things like that.
Thank you, Danielle. Other questions or comments?
I guess the only question coming to mind right now for me is, what are these meetings with posts going to look like moving forward? And how often are they going to occur?
They will be periodic there with the co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, and I, and management from Post. And we would do a presentation to the subcommittee, but we are also going to continue to be presenting at the commission meetings as a board, as we have done in the past. That will still be happening. And in addition, we will be continuing to invite Post representatives to our subcommittee meetings and maybe even our board meetings. If there are topics that we think would be helpful to have the full board or the full subcommittee here and be able to ask questions, we still very much want to do that. So we don't have, a specific calendar right now of how often we will be speaking, but they are going to be at a minimum periodic throughout this year.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, hearing none, I think we're ready to discuss then the 2026 report in greater detail. So, DOJ, may I ask you to start us off on the plans for the 2026 report and our conversation?
Yes. So we've already started discussing just a bit of an overview. So we'll talk about the ongoing relationship with Post, I think, in the 2026 report, just providing updates on the guidelines and on Post response to the 2025 report recommendations and the continued progress we're making with respect to these different workshops and topics. But then our main focus, which we'd like to include in both the research and our recommendations, is going to be about the field training course. So as we previously mentioned in the beginning of this meeting, the field training program is the last course that Post identified as responsive to the AB 953 mandate with racial and identity profiling training. And so I'm going to give just like a very brief overview of the role of field training with respect to officers and young cadets, and then open up for questions and ideas about where the subcommittee wants to focus on in terms of field training ideas. So in the guidelines workshop, for those who participated, you might remember that subject matter experts from law enforcement identified that field training officers have a tremendous influence on shaping the behaviors of basic cadet graduates. Evaluating these post-certified field training courses is critical to understanding the context and the regulation of peace officer training in California. So as I mentioned, field training is the only post-identified course that we have yet to review before we start again reviewing all of the courses and how those recommendations we previously been made are implemented. So as a bit of an overview, field training is a continuation of the Basic Academy. Basic Academy is 664 hours and field training is 440 hours. and a minimum of 10 weeks under post regulations. Field training is intended to facilitate a peace officer's transition from an academic setting or custody assignment to the performance of general law enforcement uniformed patrol duties of the employing department. So the employing department, like the agency, they're responsible for their field training. And the newly assigned officers and deputies must receive this additional training in the field on actual calls for service, where they can then learn from officers who have already had this practical patrol experience. That way they get more on the ground training. And to make the new officers' field training as effective as possible, these new officers are assigned to a field training officer, an FTO. This FTO is an experienced officer that is selected and specifically trained to conduct this type of training. The trainee's performance is then evaluated by this field training officer and is monitored by the field training program supervisor or the coordinator through daily and/or weekly reviews. So these new officers are getting constant feedback from the department on how they're implementing these new skills, how they're doing on these patrol assignments. And according to the Post Field Training Program Guide, which is available online, the field training is, quote, the most effective influence on the future direction of a department. The law enforcement department head and their field training staff must be certain that their field training program not only develops the necessary technical skills, but also reflects the policing philosophy of the department and the community that it serves. And so this is why this is such an important course for the board to review, is because a lot of the previous recommendations we've made about eliminating bias and things, those are really department-wide. They have to be cultural shifts. And so field training and this field training program is the main way to make that cultural shift, at least in the beginning with respect to new officers and with training. And so we want to review it as thoroughly as possible, and we want the board members to be as informed as possible. And to achieve this, we propose a 2-year review of the field training program. So the first year, this 2026 report, we would like to focus on education and gaining practical understanding of the role of the field training officer in the program. And what this could look like would be a presentation during a subcommittee meeting by an expert on the influence of the field training program in shaping officers and a department's views, and in eliminating those specific policing methods that we have identified as leading to racial identity profiling. So ideally, this expert would have prior law enforcement experience conducting field training and is someone who understands the goals of AB 953. Another focus of the 2026 report will be really to understand and look at other models of field training outside of the state of California. And we've been getting to understand and identify a few of those models, including looking internationally, but also at just other states and how they're conducting these programs. And then the following year, for the 2027 report, the subcommittee would give a critical analysis and critical review of the actual materials of the field training. And in the post-certified field training program, there are 18 competencies, and post identified specifically competency 6, which is community relations, professional demeanor, as the portion that the subcommittee would review. Specifically, sections 6.3, cultural diversity, and 6.4, racial profiling, are RIPA related. And post has directed the board to review these 2 sections in competency 6. And so in the subcommittee's review of the materials, there will be a refocus on the qualitative and quantitative assessment of the field training's effects on shaping officers' actions and behaviors to eliminate profiling. And so basically, we think the 2-year focus is important so that we can really get a good sense of how this training is happening, both on the ground and academically from a research perspective, and from experience of the officers that have participated in this training, to see which ways we can make this improvement to eliminate racial and identity profiling. So with that said, do any board members right now have any thoughts, comments, questions in particular on field training? I'd like to open it up for discussion, and I would love to hear any particular ideas you might have on specifically as well this year's focus of education on field training programs. What would you like to learn about? What can we do to support you in moving forward on this field training review? And I'll stop sharing so we can have a better discussion.
Angela, please.
Yes. Oh, So a couple of questions, and this looks really interesting to me and really important. Would we also, it would seem to me very important to also look at the field training officer, the courses of the field training officers must complete, especially to the extent that they are related to the topics covered by RIPA. And that's not an academy course, correct? That would be probably a course for an in-service course. But would that be, as part of the thinking, part of the analysis that we would be including, or part of the coursework that we would be looking at?
Ideally, yes. Several people we've spoken with, including subject matter experts, have identified it's that training of those field training officers as well that's really critical. So yeah, the answer is yes. I would really encourage us to look into that and include in our evaluation.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like it would be very important. And then the other comment I had is if we split this up into 2 years, and again, because of the breadth of field training, and again, it's happening on the job, I think it is going to be a pretty large undertaking by us. So I think the 2 years makes a lot of sense. In the first year, if we do the first year, and I think I don't have my screen in front of me, is education. Then before we start looking at the course materials, I think it might be helpful, even if we do break it up in that staggered like that, for the first year, while we are hearing from subject matter experts, to at least get an overview, a presentation of how it's done in California generally, without really drilling down into the courses.
That I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. And to have those materials with you as you start to learn about some of these alternative models or these ideas so that you can make critical notes. Yes, I think in writing out those 2-year distinctions, what I really meant was in this year's report, the 2026 report, we're not giving individual line edits on the materials themselves. We're going to be learning holistically about field training program and how it's done in California.
Great. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, I will just add, ditto to what Co-Chair Sierra said. And I think I really appreciate the 2-year approach. I think it helps us to really delve deeply into, the multitude of topics and just better understand as we, make recommendations. Any other comments or questions from our subcommittee members? No? Okay. So at this time, are we ready to move DOJ to public comment, or is there anything else you wanted to add regarding the 2026 report?
I would just like to add one more thing, which is that, as usual, the 2026 report will include legislative and post recommendations, and this is required by statute, by the RIPA statute. And as Co-Chair Sierra mentioned, the board hopes to engage with post earlier in the recommendations development process, as in during the course of this year, so that we can encourage post to give some initial feedback and input on our recommendations and any impediments that there might be to that implementation, just so that we can continue to tweak and improve our recommendations so that they're actually something that can be implemented on the ground and we can engage more effectively. And then the last thing I wanted to do was to pause and open up for any topics that I may not have mentioned that any of you would like to see in the 2026 report. Is there anything that you want covered, anything critical that you're interested in?
I mean,
it's possible that we knocked it out of the park. So if that's the case, you can just, let it go.
Angela, did you? Oh, okay, no. So if we don't have any further comments, I want to just thank you all, DOJ, and thank you, Danielle, for that piece. And so now I think we move to public comment. So I will also ask DOJ's help. I will try to see whose hands are raised, as we will be taking public comment at this time. But I know we have like 2 pages of screen, so I'm not sure if I can see everyone, but we will ask folks to raise their hand if they want to make a public comment. Do we have anyone in the chat or anything else who has suggested that they want? I see a couple comments in the chat. I don't know if those folks want to share their comments orally as well. Alex, is there a certain amount of time we need to hold the public comment period open?
No, Co-Chair Kulkarni, I don't see any hands raised. I do see that there is a comment from Karen Glover linking a study about police culture and socialization. I do see that in the chat, so thank you so much, but I don't see any hands raised for public members of the public to give public comment.
Okay. So hearing no public comment, I think we will move on then to item 7, which is discussion of next steps. And do we have any members of DOJ who, Danielle, can you lead us through
Yes,
this
of
part?
course.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
I don't believe that there's any vote that necessarily needs to be taken today, but just wanted to get confirmation from the subcommittee that the ideas presented for the 2026 report are acceptable and good, and we'll move forward on continuing to research and develop those topics.
So we'll
So no
open it up.
votes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say no votes, but any other discussion or ideas, and then we can close out.
Great. Yes. So do we have any comments regarding the proposal? And then it'll help us, of course, to move into what needs to happen between now and the next meeting. Hearing none. May I ask one question, Danielle? If any members of the subcommittee do have questions or comments, is it possible to, I know we won't have an open meeting, so I just wanted to know though what the process is if they do have questions after this meeting. What is the best way to handle those?
You are always welcome to contact us at
Okay.
DOJ with individual questions. That doesn't violate Bagley-Keene.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I think if we don't have any questions or comments, is it appropriate now then to adjourn the meeting? DOJ? Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you all for attending today's meeting. Really appreciate the updates by the DOJ staff, as well as from Co-Chair Sierra about the meetings with Post. Really appreciate everyone's involvement in this really important work, and as well to those who from the members of the public who've joined us today and who've shared their comments in the chat. I believe we will get it back to everyone regarding the next meeting. So stay tuned and we look forward to seeing you then. But as Danielle referenced, if you do have, if you're a member of the subcommittee and have questions or feedback, you can reach out to the DOJ staff. So with that, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you all and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great rest of your week.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.